Hello and welcome to Frontline Conversations. Today we're speaking with Vamsi Vakulabaranam, the co-director of the Asian Political Economy Program and associate professor of economics at University of Massachusetts, Amherst. He's in Chennai at the Madras Institute of Developmental Studies, where he's delivering a lecture titled Caste and Spaces in Indian Cities. For decades, caste research in India has largely stayed focused on villages. But India is now becoming an urban country. Cities are growing fast, influencing jobs, housing, education, and everyday life. And yet, caste doesn't disappear at the city gate. It just reorganizes or redesigns itself. Using census data and urban research, Vamsi's work shows that Indian cities are highly segregated by caste, even when they look socially mixed on the surface. Thank you for joining us, Vamsi. So, to start off with, whenever most of us think about caste, we immediately imagine villages. What made you start looking at cities instead? Was there a particular moment that made you think, okay, caste is very much here as well?
So, I grew up in a small town, and my imagination was largely derived from living in a small town for a long time.
Yeah.
Then I ended up, studying in a small town in the U.S. Amherst is a small town where I did my PhD.
Relatively.
But after that, I went to New York City and lived there for 3 years.
Okay.
That's when my eyes really opened to big city. And right after that, I came to Hyderabad. So I lived in Hyderabad. I taught at the University of Hyderabad. And as I started picking about, my PhD is on villages. I looked at farmer suicides in Telangana region. So when I came to Hyderabad, it was a novel experience, thinking about various social processes as they were unfolding in cities. And one of the things that I encountered in my circles, friendship circles, but also relatives, and the larger, political circles that I was interacting with, I noticed that caste was central to the way the marriage institution, the institution of marriage unfolded.
Yes,
City. And marriage is central to India, much more than any other country in the world. More people get married in
India
to Europe or China. Or
Absolutely. Yeah.
any place. More than 95 to 96% of the people get married. So that's a central institution in India, which governs class processes, governs gender processes,
Yes.
governs caste process.
Society at large.
So I noticed that your caste is very much active, in the circles around me, and that also inspired me to think about, ways of study caste in large Indian cities.
All right. So, moving on, many young people believe that once they move to a city, they will immediately achieve equality or they'll rather immediately see equality. Now, from your research, is that actually true or does caste just end up showing up in quieter or different ways?
So cities are not equal at all.
Yeah.
Cities are,
Absolutely.
in economic terms, they're very unequal.
Yes.
A large number of cities that we see today are embedded in capitalism.
Yes.
Larger capitalist processes tend to accentuate economic inequalities, class-based inequalities, which could also translate into caste-based inequalities or religion-based inequalities. And, in interesting ways, gender inequalities also emerge.
There are intersections.
There are, I prefer to use the term constitution.
No.
One axis constitutes the other. But cities are very unequal. So if people are coming into the cities thinking that, it will be a more egalitarian way of living, then they haven't understood the process of, how cities work and cities reproduce themselves. In that broad sense, cities could be liberating. If you are coming from a village where, your community is oppressed or you're alienated or, there's a lot of violence against your community. Moving to a city gives you a space of anonymity, gives you a space of liberation, from those, everyday relations that tend to oppress you, whether it's within the household or, between the household and other communities as a village.
Yes.
But it's not about equality. So if young people come to the city with the idea of achieving equality, then, they haven't yet understood the urban process. Cities are embedded in larger social processes.
Yes.
And in that sense, and caste is also central. And it doesn't just go away.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it's probably a view of liberation which doesn't map onto how cities actually function.
Yes, absolutely. So, moving on, you found that living in mixed neighborhoods helps with things like education and, escaping poverty. For someone growing up in a city, what chances when your neighbors are different from you? What changes rather when your neighbors are different from you?
So what happens is in heterogeneous, living spaces,
Yes.
there are very interesting mechanisms that kick in. So one of the mechanisms that could kick in is, if you are from two different castes, the cultural processes of constitution of who you are would be different for these two individuals. So two interactions, it could produce an integrated consciousness. And that integrated consciousness could create, a higher level of understanding the world. Or, it could also create a higher level of tolerance. It could also be, it's not about liking each other, but it's the process of, having a very different kind of a person with a very different kind of constitutive process coming in, living with you in your neighborhood, which creates a tolerance of a different kind. So you accept difference, and I think acknowledging and accepting difference is something that a neighborhood in a city can create. And then there are other processes like you could be if you are from very different castes, very different economic processes. One is in a formal sector, another is in informal sector.
Absolutely.
There could be very interesting sets of interactions. Could be hierarchical as well.
Yep.
But people who are in the formal sector are poorer people, or people from certain communities as household help, or as drivers, car drivers.
Yes.
But what happens there is a lot of fundamentally people in the formal sector depend on people in the informal sector to make themselves functional and reproduce themselves with some efficiency, daily efficiency. In that process, some certain jobs can get created, certain information exchanges can happen, and this could potentially benefit people who on both sides. The formal derives its reproductive ability from the informal sector.
Yes.
And the informal sector, people in the informal sector, they may get new sources of knowledge or information from these households, which may be engaged for paid work in the formal sector. But there could also be, a very interesting sector of interactions that can happen, within the neighborhood at the level of, suppose, there are, public goods that are needed, roads that are needed, infrastructure that is needed. More successful mobilization campaigns with the state to generate consumptive goods, public consumptive goods, are done, when there are different kinds of groups, that work together. So the households that are, that tend to be poorer benefit also from living, in neighborhoods with, people who have greater influence in achieving a certain level of exercise. So in that sense, having a mixed or integrated neighborhood tends to create, higher levels of, development outcomes.
Absolutely. All right. So, moving on to the part in your study where you compared Indian cities with American cities, and then in your talk, you rehashed it as well. You say that, when Indian cities are compared with American cities, you also compare it on the basis of race. For students who've only seen this through movies or social media, what's a simple way to understand that comparison?
So comparison is basically what we are doing in this book project, on development and diversity.
Yes.
American cities or European cities, they tend to, we can think of racial categories like, blacks and non-blacks or whites and
Non-whites.
there are not just whites and blacks in these societies.
Yes.
There are Asians, there are, South Americans. Yes. They don't belong, in a simple way to white or black. But, whites and non-whites or blacks and non-blacks is a particular kind of dualism that will help you understand the logic of segregation. And the idea behind the comparison is how integrated or segregated these cities are in Western countries or global North. Do whites congregate together? Do blacks tend to congregate together? Or non-whites, do they tend to congregate together? And compare it with the Indian setting where we are thinking about either religion or caste. So you could be Hindus and Muslims. Do Hindus live with other Hindus? Do Muslims live with other Muslims? Similarly, do castes that have had historical advantage, the so-called upper caste, do they tend to cohabit? And, do Dalits tend to cohabit?
Yes.
So at that level of aggregation, spatial aggregation, or spatial integration, or spatial segregation, these processes can be compared. And that is the point I was making at the top, which is that, Indian cities, especially if you take caste or class, they're more integrated compared to American cities or European cities.
Yes.
Whereas if you take religion, I think, processes of segregation have intensified over the last 30, 40 years.
Yes.
Especially, and they've become deeper in the last decade or so.
All right. Interesting. So, cities like Hyderabad and Mumbai, they feel very different even today. How much of that difference comes from their past, and how much are we still carrying history without even realizing it?
So they're different, but that is the point, of our book. Why is that different? History does play a key constitutive role.
Yes.
Bombay is a very modern city.
Yes.
Bombay is a city that grew rapidly in the 19th century, partly during the opium trade that occurred, with British India and China. That's when, Bombay emerged as an important urban node in India, British India.
Yes.
And then it has continued to grow, after that. Hyderabad, has a very different history.
Yes.
400 years ago, the Qutub Shahi dynasties, and, Mughals occupied, then, post-Mughal period, you have the Nizam. So there is a certain traditional, there's a longer history. There's a pre-modern history to Hyderabad. And there is a modern history after the mid-18th, early 19th century. And then you have a post-colonial history. Whereas Bombay tends to have only, the colonial history and post-colonial history. The pre-modern part is not there. So these histories do matter in the way, the cities have structured today. For instance, the city of Hyderabad, because of historical reasons, a big part of the Muslim community is concentrated spatially in one or two spatial zones in the city.
Yes.
What is known as the Old City, which used to be the walled city. Whereas a modern city like Bombay has a significant Muslim population, but Muslims are distributed in all zones.
Yes.
So the concentration levels are much low. So that's a product of history. Just to give you an example of how Muslim community is distributed spatially. That's a product of history. And so that plays into the present, and that plays a very active and constitutive role of how the present is constructed.
All right. Lovely. Now, moving on. We hear a lot about these world-class cities as well as smart cities, Now, when cities chase this idea, what happens to the people who already live there but don't quite fit into that image?
So when some of these ideas have been created during a period which is broadly under what is known as globalization or neoliberal capitalism, post 1970s 80s. These world class cities or smart cities. Smart cities is a more recent idea.
Yes.
But these categories were created during the period post 1970s in global capitalism. And the important point about these categorizations is there's a big shift in the way capitalism functioned. Capitalism was centered in countries. Countries had relations with one another between 1940s and 1970s, and cities were embedded in countries. Post 1970s, you see a new development where the competition across the world shifted from countries to cities. So it's a shift in spatial scale. So you move from the scale of the nation state to the scale of a city. So Chennai, for instance, competes with Hyderabad.
Yes.
Or Bangalore competes with Hyderabad and Chennai to attract IT capital, or to attract global capital, or to attract the capital from other cities. Right? So once this the node of the city becomes an important scalar node, during this phase of capitalism, cities acquire a very different kind of significance. They become the engines of growth, and they create hinterlands. So people are drawn from these hinterlands, and resources are drawn from the hinterland and brought to the city. And cities are competing with one another for global resources. So that's the context in which, this whole framing of a city as a world-class city and all that happens. It's basically some sort of a branding in order to attract, higher resources from global capital. So you cannot separate, these labels from the phase of capitalism. I think, this is a particular phase when the scale, shifts to the cities from the nation state.
Yes. All right. Now, if a young person, let's say, asked you, what would a city without caste discrimination actually feel like to live in? How would you answer that?
That's a very tough question.
Absolutely.
So there are two liberatory models when you think about caste.
Yes.
One liberatory model is, castelessness.
To abolish caste altogether.
Annihilation of caste, as Ambedkar called.
Yes.
That's the most desirable, option. The other way in which, Indian cities have evolved, or the nation state has evolved, or Indian communities have evolved. The other liberatory process is to make, the relations among different caste groups less hierarchical. Right? Achieve equality without partisaning, without losing the caste padding. So these are the two models. So castes become more equal with one another, or you eliminate caste entirely. These are the two models. So in the context of cities, I can only talk about what has happened in India. Caste hasn't gone away. Caste has moved from villages to cities, and caste has become an enduring institution. It's very durable, even in cities. So endogamy, is something that's practiced by most Indian, urban residents. It's only a very small portion of urban residents who have been able to reject, caste endogamy and marry outside their caste. Although that aspiration has always been there, and that illusion has always been there that, we don't really care about caste. So, in matters of marriage or romance or love, we don't need caste to play a mediating role. But the reality of it is caste hasn't gone away. Caste endogamy hasn't gone away. So one fight, an immediate fight that makes sense to me is, if there are practices of discrimination, whether it's the housing market. So, for instance, in apartment complexes, I have seen in my own life, people saying no to Muslim applicants,
Yes.
in particular the apartment complexes in Hyderabad. And that's a serious problem. I mean, you cannot discriminate against a group of people, or, if a Dalit, in case, there is a way of finding out when the applicant is a Dalit, there are subtle ways in which, people reject these applicants. So those have to be monitored carefully, and the state has to implement policies. And even within civil society, our consciousness has to evolve in order to question practices like that. Belongingness to a particular identity or community should not be a reason to reject an application for tenants in a city. So that is what makes sense to me right now, given the way Indian cities have evolved, the way Indian society has evolved. Caste hasn't gone away, but the initial fight at least may be towards achieving equality, questioning practice of discrimination, questioning any practice of violence, any practice of oppression. First, starting with the markets, but also, in public spaces, how people interact with one another. Labor market is another important space. The housing market, labor market. In labor market, there are subtle ways in which caste is still practiced. And, within corporations, you probably have heard about the famous Cisco story about how a Dalit applicant for promotion was discriminated against by a person belonging to a so-called upper caste. So caste doesn't go away that easily. So within cities, whether it's the housing market, whether it's the labor market, whether it is the product market, credit market, and credit market, asks a whole bunch of information from you before they give you a loan. So practice of discrimination can easily seep into credit market transactions. So these have to be monitored. These have to be questioned.
Yes.
And that's what it would look like, to live in a city which doesn't practice caste discrimination probably means, other things being equal, caste should not be the reason why an applicant is rejected in any of these markets.
Yes.
Or in any social process or in any public process that they participate in. But moving to the next step, which is complete castelessness, it hasn't happened so far.
Yes.
I believe that is the true idea that we should be moving towards at some point in time. But that's not how the society has evolved until now. So the fight should be against discrimination, and create greater equality among caste groups. And then the next step would be questioning the very relevance of caste.
Yeah.
In most importantly, institutions like marriage or friendships or networks. Although it looks like in Indian cities and Indian society is very far away from achieving that.
Yes, absolutely. That brings us to the end of this episode of Frontline Conversations. Thank you for watching and stay tuned for more.